Aquilo, Season 2, Chapter 9, The Flavorful Texture of Suffering. Coffee, black. I rarely take my coffee black. It's nothing against the taste. In fact, I kind of like the bitterness that lodges at the back of the throat. Not to mention, what kind of cook would I be if I wasn't able to appreciate the flavor of all the ingredients this world has to offer? Sure, some things are more of an adventure than others. When my parents had me taste sushi for the first time, I was appalled at the very idea of eating raw fish. All I wanted was the rice because it was a little sweet, and I liked that. In my defense, I was 6 at the time. Now I can't get enough of tuna and salmon sashimi. Hell, I'd even give surströmming a shot if given the chance. However, when it comes to coffee, I just can't bring myself to drink it without any bells or whistles. You might as well give me an apple and expect that I'll just take a bite. An apple, or any fruit or ingredient, is a seed of possibilities. I can make a tarte tatin or a crumble. I can make some spread, or at the very least savor it with a slice of sharp cheddar. This morning, though, I need the biggest mug of the blackest coffee available. I can say without hesitation that this is the very worst night I've had to endure in this alley. And this is while keeping in mind that I've nearly lost my life to a demon and seen dead bodies there. Don't misunderstand me. Corpses are traumatic. Demons even more so. I'm insane to still walk out here alone in the dark. But this night has carved deep grooves into my heart, and I'm not sure I'll ever be able to get over it. Here you go, I say, handing the detectives their own mugs of black coffee. Funny seeing both of you together. What do you mean? Detective Lamore asks, pouring copious amounts of sugar into his cup. I mean, you and Detective Wilson. I don't think I've ever seen you side by side like that. Aaron and I have coffee here all the time, Lamore insists. Detective Wilson takes a slow sip from his mug, nodding in approval as he swallows. She means working together, Lamore. Ah, yes, well, it's not often our departments allow us to collaborate cross-border, but this is special. The heat of my drink burns my fingers through the thick ceramic of the mug. I almost expect to hear my skin sizzle, but I can't let go. The pain helps to keep me awake. More special than a serial killer on the loose? I ask, feeling the quiver in my voice all the way down to my lungs. Every muscle in my chest is strained to exhaustion, a combination of screaming, sobbing, and crying. Even my esophagus trembles when I speak. Yeah, jurisdictions and that damn national divide can get in the way, Wilson explains. But our departments aren't heartless. So what can you tell us? I'm about to start my tale anew, rallying my strength so I can remain coherent. It's not my first go at giving someone my testimony. First, it was to the paramedic, though I don't expect my incoherent blubbering went a long way towards explaining what happened. I feel silly for how I broke down, but I also make no apologies for my reaction. You'd have to be a goddamn sociopath not to care. I was doing some late-night cooking, and how late? Lamore interrupts without even looking up from his notebook. He keeps scratching down observations while I reel from being cut off. It's not how rude he is about it. I'm a tough girl. I can live with that. But it's the context in which he does it that trips me up. I'm not sure. I started work around 1 a.m., so I must have been done around 5 or 5:30. I cleaned up and came down here a little while after to feed the raccoons. Detective Lamore looks up from his notes to squint at me. It's like he's trying to dig a hole in my forehead, peel back the skin and bone to expose the brain. Also, he can read the thoughts etched into the folds of my gray matter. Feed the raccoons. It's not a question. Lamore is highlighting that part of my story, either for himself or Wilson or just to make a point, but he doesn't ask for any further explanation. That doesn't stop me. Like a nervous child, I jump right in. It's just the one. It's smaller than the others, and they don't let her eat as much, and... My words trail off. The detective is bent over his pen again, using his free hand to sip some more sweetened coffee. I can't make out the swirling mess of letters and ink, but I doubt he's making an account of my interest in Brioche's welfare. Lamore is recording my reaction. He's testing me. The interruption was but a poke and a prod, to see in what direction I'd twitch. And how long were you out before the victim wandered into the alley? The victim. It's a deliberately passionless way to describe him, from the choice of words to the way Lamore says them, waving the tip of his pen in the air next to his face. I remember the red and white flashing lights of the ambulance as it drove away, less than half an hour ago, and the precious broken cargo it carried. To see Lamore reduce that to a cold point of evidence in his investigation is like a match thrown atop a gas stove. Teddy, I speak the name loud and clear, getting my point across that this is a person we're discussing, stumbled into the alley just as the sky was starting to go blue over the trees. It was still pretty dark here, and the porch lights were still on, so it must have been around 6:30, maybe a little earlier. He pauses to appraise me, arching a single white eyebrow in the process. On any given day, I really like Detective Lamore. He's a kind and considerate old man. Soft-spoken and careful of movement, it's hard to imagine him doing anything by accident, especially his choice of words. Licking the tip of his ballpoint first, Lamore jots down a few more words of notes. Was Theodore conscious when you found him? The question is incorrect, and, again, I doubt this is a mistake. I heard him moaning before I saw him, and when I went to see who it was, I heard him fall. Only then did I see him. And you called 911 immediately? Even Wilson twitches at this question. I can see him realizing that his Canadian counterpart has turned this simple statement into an interrogation. But he's not doing anything about it either, neither to express outrage or stick up for me. He's waiting to see where this goes, all while leaving me to sweat it out. But I'm on to Lamore. I see his plan. I just don't know what the end game is. No, I answer, struggling to keep my temper in check. I called out his name, took his pulse, checked his breathing. And what did you find? Again with the interruption. Again, Lamore tries to rattle me. He knows damn well what I found. I found a little boy, passed out with fresh scrapes on his right arm. It was like he'd fallen asleep and wouldn't wake up. I didn't shake him or anything, though, because I didn't and still don't know what's wrong with him. Detective Lamore? This tactic of his has to stop. Whatever doubts he has, I can't handle them. I don't have the energy, and I can't allow him or Detective Wilson to waste time on games and incoherent suspicions. I know who's responsible for this. So, he says, ignoring my question, you didn't try anything to wake the boy? Detective Lamore? I repeat myself, calm and firm, making sure he sees that I'm willing to keep going as long as it takes to be acknowledged. Ms. Dufour? The old detective puts his ballpoint down at a perfect angle with his notebook. For the first time ever, he frowns at me. Detective, I start, trying to keep my tone calm. I want to avoid escalating. I don't understand your line of questioning. I'm just trying to establish a clear timeline of events. And I was going to tell you before the questions started. If I didn't know better, I'd think you suspect me of something. Detective Lamore picks up his notebook and carefully flips the cover back. He takes his pen and slips it through the spirals that bind the pages. Dragging the moment on as long as can be tolerated, he takes another sip of his coffee, and I feel by the way he's doing it that it's going to be his last. I might make it his last, depending on what he says next. Ms. Dufour, I do suspect you. I've suspected you since Detective Wilson requested I drop the investigation into the killings last fall, under the pretext that the murders would stop. And they have. But I haven't forgotten how we met, Ms. Dufour, at the very location of Sarah Payne's murder. A few days ago, Michael Valencia fainted in front of your cafe. Now there's a boy in a coma, which you found just this morning, less than 20 feet from where another body had been found behind your cafe. Miss Dufour, if I didn't have suspicions about you, I would be better off turning in my badge and settling into retirement because I wouldn't be doing my job." I did not expect this from Detective Lamore. He remains calm throughout his entire explanation, and I don't think there's any vitriol behind his words, but the cut is deep nonetheless. I know I have nothing to do with the Falls murders. In fact, I'm quite proud of my role in putting a stop to them. To have the finger pointed in my direction stings like lemon juice in a fresh cut. And I can't tell him any of that. Thankfully, Wilson speaks up for me at last. "Julian," he says, "we agreed that this wouldn't get brought up again. We didn't get our man, but we got the murders to stop. We can figure out the rest later." With a slow shake of the head, Julian Lamore stands. He's not angry. He's not bitter. He looks regretful. "Only as long as there were no further deaths, Aaron. No one's dead. The boy is driving to the hospital in a coma, right as we speak. I'm not waiting until it's a child's corpse that Miss Dufour conveniently finds in her alley." "Julian!" Wilson is outraged. I'm outraged. But I can see where Detective Lamore is coming from and where he's going. "I want to keep you on this case with me, Aaron, but you have to keep sight of the greater picture, in spite of your friendship with Miss Dufour. Otherwise, I'll cut you off without a second thought. The boy was found on my side of the border. You can't take me off this investigation." Detective Lamore shakes his head again, expressing more regret but also disappointment. "Theodore Lariviere is a Canadian citizen. You're on this case out of courtesy from me to you. You're a good detective, Aaron, but if you're going to be a liability, I can work this one alone." The weight of decades push down on Lamore the moment his threat is uttered. He pulls at the hem of his tan-colored cardigan, takes a few steps towards the front door of the Aquilo Cafe, pauses, and turns around. "Thank you for the coffee, Miss Dufour. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go talk with the boy's mother." The sign that says "We're open" in big cheery letters is heavy in my hand. Flipping it over requires a noticeable effort. It's also pointless. There's no one here. Wilson was the last of the officers and paramedics on the scene. He gave a half-hearted attempt to reassure me that Detective Lamore didn't have anything personal against me and that the old cop was just being thorough. I can tell that's not the whole truth. That's what's so frustrating. Lamore has every reason to be suspicious. None of his explanations are out of line, and I'd think the same way he does were I in his shoes. Worse, even. It's to his credit that he's not painting me as a prime suspect. Then again, maybe he isn't for the same reason I didn't tell him about my own theories. Not that it wasn't tempting. But while I'm convinced that Agnes is behind these incidents and the general lethargy that's spreading through town, I don't know how or even why. I don't have a motive, an opportunity, or even a means. All I have is a vague impression, and that's not enough flour to bake a cake. Which is kind of what Gulliver warned me against. Speaking of which, you're still here? Gulliver pushes his way through the front door to the cafe. He's not exactly my first and only client of the day, but he's the only person at the Aquilo right now, and there haven't been many others. I can just leave if that's a problem. What's wrong with me that I have to bite my tongue or say yes? It's a struggle to admit, but I'm still annoyed with Gulliver, and I was fine with having this quiet pity party on my own. My hands are faster than my brain or my mouth when it comes to answering, though, and before I know it, there's a plate in my left hand that I'm piling with baked goods with my right. Food before conversation. That's the kind of gal I am. "Sit," I order, pushing the plate in front of his favorite stool. Coffee, cream, and sugar are quick to follow. I hold back a smile when Gulliver grunts his gratitude after taking his usual seat. "Managed to find your little girlfriend?" I ask, trying to frost my question in mischief, passing it off as a harmless tease, but I might as well drizzle caramel on a steak and call it ice cream. "Please stop that." I put his coffee down and give a thorough inspection of the grooves left by the fork Agnes stabbed into my countertop. I've yet to consider if I should get them patched up. The previous months have accumulated a reasonable number of nicks and scratches on the new counter. The first one, made by a customer using a butter knife to cut a croissant right on top of it, like a maniac, felt like a cut directly into my skin. Since then, I've matured to accept that every little bit of damage would become part of the character of the cafe. That one set of 4 tiny indentations in the varnished surface has become easy for me to spot over the last few days. Right now, it's what I choose to focus on to avoid Gulliver's stare. I'm sorry. The words squeeze out of me like stiff icing through a piping tip. Gulliver waves a brioche with a bite taken out, which I choose to mean he's forgiving me. You can't blame me for assuming you had some kind of infatuation, though. Tell me, what's the deal with that girl? Gulliver nods at my question, but loses himself in thought while pouring sugar into his coffee. He seems to be collecting his thoughts at the same rate the white grains gather at the bottom of his mug, only becoming useful once he stirs them. She's an angry, paranoid kid who walks into this shop, full of piss and vinegar and ready to pick a fight with whoever gives her the first excuse. It's not my place to ask or to speculate, but she looks like someone who's at a crossroads and trying to figure out what way to go. And Aquilo is just that kind of crossroads. I finish the thought, echoing it from something Gulliver said before. Exactly. I've been watching people walk into this cafe for a few years now, and those that walk in looking for a path and a pastry usually walk out with both. I give a quick glance over my shoulder. Through my mind's eye, I can see the old Aquilo Cafe, the one from before I came and before I invited 2 trigger-happy inquisitors to fight a demon in my dining room. The Aquilo from before the renovations, but after Doris's death. There were boxes of supplies piled high in the kitchen and stacks of newspapers on the table closest to the door. A huge truck blocked the sun from filtering through the front window. 2 people are having a confrontation in this memory. A young 18-year-old girl with a fillet knife is trying to keep a giant man away from her. It's a misunderstanding, and it will eventually get cleared up, but I recognize the girl. She's still around, but there's not as much of her left as I might have thought. Can I get a refill? Gulliver asks, pushing his mug towards me. A yawn wide enough to swallow the sky shapes his mouth for a few seconds before he gives his head a vigorous shake. Here you go. I slide the freshly filled mug back at him. Don't get mad, but I don't think Agnes is going to turn out as well as I did just for being here. Who said anything about you? He gives me a weak smile, leaving me to speculate about his meaning, then proceeds to empty his mug without stirring a drop of cream or a grain of sugar. Oh, there. Isn't that a little hot? It's fine. I've drunk hotter. Another refill? After a pause of hesitation, I take the mug and fill it again. I'm about to once again slide it over when I hear the door chimes behind me. My first reflex is to be annoyed. I'm exhausted and stressed, but also having a bit of a moment with a friend. I have a lot of questions about where he went when he left yesterday and whether he found Agnes or not. Drink. Slowly, I tell him before relinquishing the mug. Forcing a smile on my face, I turn around to greet my new customer. At this rate, whoever it is will end up being a sizable portion of my daily patronage, so I might as well put in the effort. Besides, it's more than likely someone I know whom I've served dozens of times over the months. All I have to do is remember their usual. Easy as sugar cookies. Olivia? I shouldn't be surprised to see her. During any given day, Olivia will drop in at least once, often twice. By the same token, her absence yesterday was felt all that more heavily. Of course, I don't have to take her order. Olivia's very presence put somewhat of a spring in my step. A familiar face is exactly what I need right now, and with the day of feeding the hunger demon closing in, I could use her counsel. She stands at the register watching me gather a cup and an apple strudel, which I place at her usual seat right next to Gulliver. It feels like my gang is all here, and we can start pulling some answers together. If Gulliver's talked to Agnes, maybe she told him something about what she's doing to my clients. With Olivia's clear-headed thinking, we'll be well on our way to unraveling this little mystery, too. Thank you, but I'm not staying long. Olivia says this, making an effort to keep her back straight and her purse held close to her side. Oh, I say, deflated. Do you want the strudel and coffee to go? This is such a standard reaction to when a customer says they're in a hurry, and it feels like a placeholder for the more immediate question. What's wrong? No. Olivia's voice is terse, as uncompromised as raw spinach. My lips part to ask what's wrong, but she doesn't give me the luxury. I heard you fired Agnes. Yes, but I try to slip in an explanation. That's fine, Olivia interrupts. It's your business and you handle it as you see fit. But I'm here to ask that you keep my Henry the hell out of it. If I didn't know any better, I'd think she's mad at me. I can't have Olivia mad at me. I need her now more than ever. She's the only one who knew Doris enough, or the right way to help me with the hunger demon. I need her advice. Oh, okay, I stammer, looking for something smart to say, something that'll help me figure out why she's being so cold. Good. Well, I have a big day tomorrow. She, too, looks to be fumbling for something to keep the conversation going. Maybe I can scrape off the burnt parts and save this toast. Okay. Feel free to drop by when you have time. What was that, Miriam? Ask about Henry or how her work on the road is going. Olivia answers before giving a gentle nod and turning away. The chimes sing her departure, and I'm again left alone with Gulliver. A new scene paints itself in my head. Behind me, Gulliver is already chewing on the abandoned apple strudel, not one to let a lonely pastry go to waste. It's a comforting thought that I take with me as I turn around, only to see it crumble to pieces when I see Gulliver strewn over the counter, his own mug spilled over and his face planted on a crushed brioche. The Aquilo Cafe remains empty through the afternoon and into the evening. What happened to Gulliver? He'd fallen asleep. You'd be right to assume that I feared he'd suffered the same fate as Michael Valencia and Theodore Lariviere. The symptoms were certainly there. Sudden fatigue and unexpected loss of consciousness. Unlike Michael and Teddy, however, Gulliver has as good an excuse as any. He's tired. Considering I've been surviving on coffee and fear for 2 days straight, I'm in no position to lay blame at his feet. After I woke him, every admonishment I leveled was answered with some variation of, "You too." Eventually, I managed to secure a promise that he would get back to his truck and get a full night's sleep. My demands were met with little objection, though I expect he had few options other than to obey. Whether Gulliver fell under the influence of Agnes or not, though, it does shine a light onto my own situation. I'm caught in a loop, aren't I? Going about the last few days like debris circling the drain of a sink before I vanish down the pipe. Fear about the hunger demon mounts. I fret over what to do. The mystery of what Agnes is doing to my customers lingers. I try to bake my way out of both situations, all at the cost of getting so much as a wink of rest. Just thinking of Gulliver's huge form collapsed on my countertop, coffee dripping to the floor next to him. I fear what might happen if my exhaustion catches up to me at the wrong moment. I've been afraid of becoming a meal for the monster that feeds, but I don't want to make it so easy that I take a nap on its plate. All of my allies have been bled off, one way or another. Olivia's warning makes me all the more tempted to contact Henry. He seemed to know a whole hell of a lot about the ghosts and shadows of Aquilo, and Helen did warn me that the Figs know more than they're willing to share, which strikes me as strange considering how much Olivia has already laid out for me. Then again, she does have a way of avoiding straight answers when she puts her mind to it. But that's it, isn't it? Helen! I always wait to see her ride in like the cavalry, carrying a sack of much-needed advice, as dry as it may be. What if I flip the script for once? Try a different take on that recipe, and instead of waiting until it's fortuitous for her to rain down her support, I seek it out myself. That's right. Show some humility, Miriam. Helen knew Doris just as well as Olivia. Whatever answers I could get from my Aquilo mom, I can just as easily pry from my Aquilo dad. Rue Principale is the kind of quiet you expect just before rainfall, when the wind dies for a few minutes as the clouds roll in from the horizon. The night has just made its subtle entrance, stealing the last few beams of light from the sky, replacing them with the pale imitations streaming out of street lamps and storefronts. If I crane my neck, I can see the windows of Helen Edna Notary Public's office. I'm relieved to see the cold blue glow of fluorescence coming through them. For a moment, I worried that she had gone off. For the longest time, I assumed Helen didn't have much of a social life, but recent events have shown me that there's more to the notary than I had assumed. Much more, it seems. I make a point of bringing some pastries, a small bag of homemade sugar donuts, along with coffee, as a friendly payment for the counsel I'm about to request. Their weight in my hand serves to keep me company on the short walk over, a promise of the conversation to come. Food is my language. It allows me to start interactions with a thank you without even uttering a single word. But the coffee falls from my hand, paper cups exploding on the sidewalk while the bag slips from my fingers. The sound of paper crashing on cement barely registers over the loud ringing that fills my ears, obscuring even the drumming of my beating heart. Peter is there. I see him through the window, his smile as white and sweet as royal icing. He's leaning back in one of the leather chairs across from Helen's desk. I want to think he's there to talk about some legal issue. Perhaps, like me, it was family that brought him to Aquilo, and there's paperwork to fill out, and... But no, that's not it. Helen Edna isn't sitting at her desk. Instead, she's sitting on her desk, legs crossed only a few inches from Peter's face, wearing a smile of her own. It's enough that I barely recognize her, features stretched and teeth on display for the entire world to see. And right now, her entire world is Peter. I'm glad my feet know what to do next. They do what any good friend would do in this situation and pull me the hell away. They do so with haste that can only be fueled with either fear or hatred, or the strange combination of both that only heartbreak can pull together. I wish the Aquilo was farther down the street. Perhaps I want it to be at the other end of town or in another city entirely. I want it to be as far as possible, if only so I can feel myself running from this longer. The chimes greet me back, their cheery little song completely at odds with my mood and interrupting what should be a perfectly good meltdown. I want to slam the door, let my back slide down its glass surface, and my eyes fill with tears as I sob my sadness away. But I don't. The sting is there. I feel it poking through my heart, making each beat stab with pain. However, it lacks the impact of finding Trevor cheating on me with that bitch Cindy. I stand in the space between the door to the Aquilo and the register on my counter. The empty cafe whispers quiet words of comfort, and I can feel it reach out to me, pulling me into its arms. Without moving, without touching anything physical but the floor through my feet, I feel my head come to rest on a sympathetic shoulder. Shh. The silence seems to say, it's going to be fine. It's true. What did I know of Peter? What were my plans for him? A fling? A relationship? Did I expect he and I would spark a whirlwind romance? That for some reason I would be the only one in his eyes? At least now I know where it was Helen had been coming back from the other night. My imagination conjures gentle fingers stroking the back of my head, running through my hair in soft touches. It's the caress of a mother for a grieving child, and it feels real enough to do the work. This, I start, testing my own voice, looking for the tremble of pain that I expect to be woven in the words. This is for the best. The lie is strong enough to let me believe it. To let me think that with my attraction to Peter out of the way, brutally torn off with an innocent glance through a window, I can now focus on the real problems facing me, facing Aquilo. But just thinking of that stolen sight materializes the image in my mind. It's clear apart from the blurry wetness of tears at the edge of sight. Clear enough to notice details I'd missed. Clear enough to notice how Peter is looking back at me through the window while caressing Helen's exposed knee. Clear enough to see his smile widen at my sight. Aquilo is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You have no idea how much it helps. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Visit ko-fi.com/Aquilo to donate a cup. Questions? Comments? Email us at aquilo@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Aquilo.